Good morning, everyone. It's Nick Wilding. Thank you for joining this the webinar today, the People Matter webinar. We'll start in 2 or 3 minutes. We'll wait for others to start to join us, and so we'll start with Richard and Charlie in 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. For those of you joining, we'll start. Okay, let's start. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking time out to join the first in our People Matter webinar program, organised by Cyber Risk Aware in partnership with the Oxford Cyber Academy. I'm looking forward to a really great discussion this morning with 2 very close colleagues. No slides, just an informal and hopefully an informed chat about one of the critical areas of business risk that any organisation faces. Just a couple of admin things first. If you'd like to ask any questions, which we'll take at the end, please put those in the Q&A box. And if you have any technical issues, please just send us a chat message, and we've got guys in the background that will be able to hopefully resolve any issues that you have. So before intros, I just wanted to give you a very quick background to the context and purpose of the People Matter program. I think everyone on this webinar will agree that our people are central to our organisation's success, security, and the resilience. We've known for years that hackers target people, not technology. And for just as long, we've been repeating the mantra that a vigilant, cyber risk aware workforce is our main defence against cyber criminals. Yet, I think despite all our efforts, we do appear still to be struggling to crack the problem. Too many organisations still either ignore the human factor in their organisational resilience or continue to apply outdated or compliance-driven tick box approaches to training their employees. So talking together, Richard and I thought that we needed a fresh look. We needed to exploit the insights from senior practitioners, as well as behavioural and social sciences that can transform the way organisations develop and sustain strong, secure habits and behaviours across the workforce. And at Cyber Risk Aware, we're really keen to bring you the very latest insights, innovation and ideas for effective security behaviour change. And that's why we've created the People Matter webinar program in partnership with our good friends at the Oxford Cyber Academy. And it's designed to bring leaders in business, security, and academia together to share their challenges, their lessons learned, and new perspectives on this challenging subject. The purpose is, in small ways, to help to provide guidance, know-how, and a trusted network for anyone involved in developing secure cultures and behaviours in their organisation. So just a little bit about me first before I'll pass you over to Richard and Charlie for their intros. I've been in the security sector since 2000. I worked at a firm called Etica for 11 years, which is now BA Systems Applied Intelligence, before moving on to Axelos Global Best Practice, a joint venture between the UK Cabinet Office and Capita, and set up new cyber resilience best practice training, including Resilient Frontline security awareness training. And I've recently joined the great team at Cyber Risk Aware, where we provide real-time, behaviour-driven security education and training for organisations of all sizes around the world. I've worked with and advised many organisations in the boardroom, with the security team and with HR and L&D to help them adopt intelligence-led approaches to security education. I'm passionate about helping to change the relationship people have with technology and using evidence-based techniques and narrative in educating our employees and in building security centred around our people, not the other way around. And I've also worked closely and continue to work closely with academia to better understand the behavioural science and the evidence base for what good security education and behaviour change can look like. One of the real joys of the work I do is meeting great, inspiring people. And Richard, that's a good intro to you. We've known each other for many years. So over to you for your short intro.
Thanks very much, Nick, and hello to everybody from me as well. Thank you very much for joining the webinar. I've been in corporate security, I suppose now for about 15 or 16 years with a range of experience across sectors. So I started in financial services, in banking. I've been in telecoms, aviation, aeronautics, and more recently working in the oil and gas sector. So during the period that I've been involved, I've seen how security has been turned, in a sense, completely on its head. It started out being all about physical security, fraud management, and those sorts of issues. A situation in which actually IT security, information security, was simply a sub-department of any security setup, to an extent to which now the Chief Information Security Officer, of course, is a key person in managing risk for any business, with facing risks which potentially could actually kill the business if they're not managed properly. So I've seen that huge change in my time, and the rise in the importance of security culture and awareness education alongside it. The Oxford Cyber Academy, to say two words about that, was really born in reaction to two things. First of all, the incredible speed of development in the technology, which we describe as the fourth industrial revolution, making sure that people could actually take advantage of all the benefits that the technology is bringing us. But at the same time, and I have to say, as a security person with a slightly heavy heart, the realization too that there's a profound amount of ignorance out there about how we should be managing the risks which come with all the benefits of the new technology. So we run a series of courses, research projects, webinars, seminars, in order to try and help the process of educating people about how we can safely take advantage of this great new world in which we're entering.
Thanks, Richard. Charlie, we've also known each other for many years. Could you just provide a short intro before we get into the meat of the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a slightly different background. I started my career way back when in internal communications. I joined a company called Amy, which is a fairly small organisation, and decided that I wanted in on internal communications. So I worked there for quite some time, moved on to Vodafone, and it was at Vodafone that I had my first role supporting fraud, risk and security, and realised that I was actually pretty good at getting people to do what I wanted them to do, so changing their behaviours. From that role within Vodafone, I was allowed to do some really quite cool and creative stuff, and then moved on to other roles within telecoms. I then spent a lot more time back at Vodafone, heading up the security awareness programme and doing quite a few different things. before moving on to Aviva and financial services. So I'm now at Willis Towers Watson, and I've been there for about a year and a half now, looking after their security awareness program.
Brilliant. Thanks, Charlie. So yes, Richard and I, when we got together, we thought we would bring together a range of experts who have many years experience in this space. And Charlie was one of the first we thought we should bring to an audience. Charlie, the first question, we've mentioned awareness there in our introductions, this security awareness. The first question I'd like to pose is, isn't the challenge that we face so much more than just awareness?
God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in the time that I've been doing it, so it's been about 15, 20 years now, the whole field of security awareness has drastically changed since those days. I mean, I would say it's so much more about risk. And I think that I've had to really ramp up and expand on my risk knowledge skills, as well as lots of other different skills. So, I mean, my background's internal communications, but I've had to maximize on influencing, networking, marketing, all of those different skills that you need to be able to be successful in large scale businesses now around influencing security behaviors. So, I mean, and there's one other thing that I would say actually as well is the thing that's jumped out at me in the last 15 years is just because somebody's aware of something, it doesn't mean they understand it or they're not going to make a mistake around it. You know, you can have all the policies in the world, you can communicate as much as you need to, but ultimately humans make mistakes. And if somebody doesn't truly invest in it, then those are always going to happen.
I've certainly seen that with a lot of organizations that I've worked with, this sense that knowledge is power, but at the end of the day, knowledge without action is pretty pointless. And that we need to sort of provide people with the right information at the right time to ensure that they stand any chance of doing the right thing at the right time.
Exactly. And the world of work is so busy now. So if you think about how it was 20, 30 years ago, cyber security, people knew about it to some extent, but it wasn't as massively in their lives as it is now. You can't look at the news from one day to the next without there being something about cyber. So I would say the challenge is not about awareness because people are aware of it. It's about their own actions off the back of it.
It's interesting. I was presenting at another event earlier this week, and I found myself saying that all of us have experience of this. All of us have our own little stories. All of us have either been attacked ourselves or certainly, at the very least, know someone else that does and has. So we should all feel that connection with this space. But sadly, I find that we still I think it perhaps comes down to a language issue. That when you start talking about cybersecurity awareness, people tend to switch off. They tend to think it's a technical thing, rather than the fact that this is all about business. This is the way we live our lives. You know, we're all connected. It should be seen as an inherent part of our skills, our digital skills.
Really, yeah.
I just comment on that, Nick, that I've always been a strong believer in the fact that, as you say, it's actually a social issue, not just a business or a company issue. Basic digital skills, I think, are being better taught in schools these days, but we've still got an awful long way to go. And one of my pleas has always been, why doesn't the government, or any government, for example, set up a long-term education campaign, as we did in the old days around seatbelts or the Green Cross Code or all those sorts of things, to encourage safe behavior? Because if we did that, and there was at least that basic degree of knowledge in the population, it would save people like Charlie a bit of work at the beginning at least. People would come in with some basic understanding that there was an issue there.
The hygiene that we all need, on some of the most critical risks, the phishing, the social use of social media, the password stuff, something that is so, when you're teaching it and building training courses, is seemingly so simple, but actually very difficult to actually convey in a way that truly engages, relevant to people.
I mean, if you look at the risks are even bigger now. So for either businesses or individuals, if you look at when the pandemic started and people started trying to manipulate that environment in order to try and take over people's accounts, etc. And the same within businesses with ransomware. As the maturity increases, the complexity of the kind of things that people try and attack us with increases as well.
I think there is an issue in all of this as well, Charlie, about empowerment. People, as Nick indicated, really very often feel helpless in all of this. They think that this is deeply techie, anarchy stuff that they don't understand. Whereas in fact, much of the basics is something that everybody can absorb and put into practice without too much effort. It's the sort of effect you get when you start talking to people about the extent to which their data is exposed on social media, for example. Their eyes kind of resolve, and they're very often horrified by what they hear, but they're not keen to get into page 35 of the small print in the T's and C's actually to do anything about it. And of course, that's deliberately done not to make it too easy. But generally speaking, in our world, security awareness, the basic lessons can be fairly simple and straightforward. People just need to understand what they are.
Coming back to something you just said, Richard, as well about government initiative, I'm encouraged to hear the government and the new chief exec at the National Cybersecurity Centre talking about a society-wide response that we need to ransomware. And so that's encouraging, which he said at the RUSI presentation last week. But obviously, ransomware, it is a critical issue at the moment. It's one of the favoured attack choices of the cyber criminals. But yes, we need to extend that sort of effort across to everyone, so that everyone can have that confidence to be able to talk and share their own experiences about it. And one of the things that really does, sort of moving on to the second sort of area for discussion, that really does, it used to frustrate me, I think it just annoys me now, which is you so regularly hear people still talking, whether it's the media or actually within the security industry, still talking about people being the weakest link. And that really does frustrate me, because we stand no chance. We're still framing the challenge in that perspective. People have got to be part of the solution. And Charlie, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I keep on saying to everybody that I speak to on this subject that we are human. And although the technology can be as developed as possible, it still needs human interactions. And humans by nature will make mistakes. And they don't want to make mistakes unless they're malicious or they're trying to do something deliberately as an insider. The mistakes aren't deliberate. And it all comes down to me personally to trust, because if you work for a business where you are able to raise your hand when you've done something wrong, you're able to flag it to someone that can then do something about it, the risk to the business isn't quite so bad. But if you work for a business that hides stuff, or you work for somewhere that encourages you to bend and break rules to get stuff done, then actually you've got a weak culture when it comes to security. And it's a big challenge to face, because people are always pressured between doing the right thing and getting stuff done these days. I don't know if you agree, Richard.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely. And trust is one of the two key words that I hope we have a chance to debate a little bit more as we go along. The fact is, of course, that nobody enjoys working in an organization where you feel you're constantly under surveillance or under pressure because you're regarded fundamentally as an idiot who needs to be controlled. Of course, that's not going to be a productive environment for anybody. And trust, if we're going to move on in a minute, as I suspect we will, into remote working, the fact is that anybody who's working from home has to be in a situation of a degree of trust by his employer. And how the employer manages that will also have a big impact on the employee's attitude towards the company. I'm thinking particularly of, it comes back to what Nick was saying really about the whole question of being somebody being a weak link in the defense. If you treat them in that way, then they will always be slightly nervous about owning up to any problem that there might be in a quite unnecessary way. And then if you add on top of that something which of course the unions love, that you start having what are called productivity tools used by the company to monitor keystrokes, to monitor your presence in front of the screen. Again, what sort of a culture are you creating with that?
I think my view is just, and I've worked with companies where they do stigmatize mistakes. There is a name and shame culture. I'm pleased to say I think those are getting less now. But it's about preventing individuals or teams being singled out for blame, because any security incident, any behavior is an opportunity for guidance and advice for the individual, and a critical part of learning for the organization. And one of the key areas for me in that is building a culture and environment where people are very happy and confident to report incidents. And it might be their own behaviors, and do that knowing not going to be stigmatized or disciplined as a result. The other thing I'd add to the trust thing from my point of view, and something I've seen in a growing number of organizations, which is great to see, and I know, Charlie, you've had some real experience in this, is the word collaboration. And actually collaboration based on actively engaging and listening to our employees to better understand the daily frustrations and constraints that they have to comply with security policies. People really should be at the heart of any cybersecurity strategy, and good security, it works around people, not the other way around. An example of that, just very quickly, in my old company, I was involved and led a workshop with Royal Holloway and the NCSC, where we wanted to bring the staff together with the security information team. So we asked the staff beforehand to come to the workshop with a daily challenge, security challenge that they have in delivering what they are paid to do, their day job. And then we had the security guys coming with the security policies. And what we found, we actually used Lego. We used Lego to describe what that problem was, that challenge. And it ranged, that was fantastic. We had about a dozen members of staff talking to the security, open-minded. And what we found is in defining the problem, that the staff, that they just opened up. It was the first time that anybody had taken time out to actually listen to them, to understand, hang on, I come to work and this is what I'm paid to do. And this is what I come to, we don't come to work to be secure and safe every day. We come to work to do our job. And part of that is to do that safely and securely, but sometimes it takes time. It's complicated. It's not easy to do. I don't have the confidence. It's not doable as such. And I think it was a revelation to see the staff leave that workshop and to sort of carry on talking about it afterwards. And the result of that was that actually some of the security policies were adapted to ensure that they fitted in with the way in which we live up. This is again about providing best knowledge, training at the point of need as well. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I mean, I think that's a hugely powerful thing, because working in an organization where there's massive technological advances and there's programs and systems and softwares coming down all over the place that people are having to adapt to be able to pilot launch those things to a collective of people who can give you a really strong, robust opinion on whether it actually works with what we're doing right now or whether it needs changing, can drastically change how you launch something and how people adopt something as well.
I think that's really fundamental, Nick, going with the grain of the worker rather than against the grain, because that's the way in which security is always seen as the blocker, the organization that slows everything down. And of course, in a broader context within the organization, that's a really bad place for security to be. I heard an analogy recently which really struck me. I was talking to some architect friends, and they were talking about an architect in Italy who'd recently designed a development in the center of which was a large block of apartments. There must have been 60, 70 apartments there. And apparently he designed everything, but what he did not design was the access to the block of flats, the roadways or anything. What he did was the block of flats was put up, and then he watched what people did, the paths that people actually took, rather than imposing walkways where they had to walk. He watched to see where the natural ways were for the people to find their way around the site and out of it, example, and then develop the roads accordingly. And I thought that was quite an interesting analogy for security.
Interesting. Yes, I'm not quite sure but that sounds fascinating. It's sort of security by real design in that respect. So moving on, and again, something we've touched on is this, the fact that, we've all got our jobs to do, and this area of operational efficiency, and every organization's under time and cost pressure. and it comes back to the title of the discussion for today, and doing more with less. So how far can you deliver more with less when it comes to awareness training? You know, how do you square the need for training people on a regular basis with the time it takes to do this, and in conjunction with all the other bits of training that organizations need to provide their employees, whether that's regulatory or compliance-driven stuff?
I mean, I'm quite experienced in this space because in all of my roles that I've held in security awareness, I've not had a huge budget, and I've had to really learn to find ways to be creative with what I have. I mean, the way that it's always worked quite nicely for me is to think everything through from the employee perspective from the outset. So I'm the interaction between the technology guys and the people at the end who are going to actually receive all of the things that are going on. And being in that role is really useful for me because I can turn what would be quite a complex training system program into something quite behavioral for our people to be able to help change their behavior. I mean, some of the biggest things that I would say to people on this call who are trying to do a lot with a small budget is actually it's about collaboration again. So it's about finding influencers within your business, either that can sponsor and help drive messaging across the business or help give you some budget necessarily to help you. But it's also about those external relationships as well. And you know, you can find that you can find providers out there who will perhaps be up for a proof of concept. I've been doing quite a few different proof of concepts this year, looking at ways of bringing in real-time training, behavioral nudges, etc. And those pilots then can show a really, really strong and quick return on investment for what it is you're trying to achieve. And you can then work to try and make those bigger. I mean, Nick, this is your world, right? So you know a lot about this stuff.
Yeah, certainly. I think my own journey in this area of security awareness and education has evolved over the last 7 or 8 years, and now working at Cyber Risk Aware, where we provide real-time training based on actual behaviours that we get from the network defence systems, and then attach different events to behaviours, is for me one of the ways in which we have to progress, because in that way we're identifying the higher risk people and the lower risk people. And in that way, you can make sure that you're targeting training where it's needed most, whether it's an individual or teams or territories, countries, and also in making sure that the training is as relevant as possible, because you've actually understood the context and the motivation that sat behind that particular event and behavior. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely critical.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, obviously, given my background, perhaps I tend to come at this more from an organizational point of view, but perhaps a couple of things to be said. And really the move to remote working over the last 18 months was a classic example of this. We're far too prone in security, I think, to be acting in our own little silo rather than collaborating with people. And I think we hear particularly of HR and internal comms, who actually could be a big help to us in getting our message across. What I'm thinking of in remote working was that most companies, there were certain companies, of course, which managed the transition extremely well because they were prepared and they planned for it and all of that. But a large number of companies, and especially SMEs, were not prepared. And so there was an inevitable jostling for positions. Security thought they were the most important. HR had all sorts of problems that they were trying to manage. They thought they were the most important. And facilities, on the other hand, also had all sorts of messages to get across because they were dealing with potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds of investment in property and how they were going to manage all of that. So that was a classic area of conflict. I think switch the lens slightly and look, and this is the fashion these days, of course, look with a more of an ESG lens, particularly on the social and the governance side. There are broad areas where actually security, HR, and internal comms should be working much, much more closely together. And I don't want to bang on about this too much because there are a number of areas that you could identify there. I'm thinking about mental health in the context of the pandemic, for example, or much broader issues like diversity or gender, which traditionally would never be seen in a million years as anything to do with security, but actually, if you think them through, very much are.
And it links also to the whole health and safety as well, Richard.
Yeah, exactly. So instead, I think there is a tendency justified to a certain extent by the facts that security messaging is often watered down or not helped, let's say, by HR and internal comms, who of course will have their own brand messaging system to work out. But if these various elements of the company, who after all, at the end of the day, we're all supposed to be on the same side, are working together better to understand each other, then some of the problems of finance and resource will fall away, because you're actually working as a team on a project rather than working separately and to some extent even perhaps against each other.
I totally agree. A couple of observations on that, Richard, or one observation and leading on to the next question. So I think we can also learn, I think one of the things within the security industry is that we tend to live in a bit of an echo chamber, and we're often seem to be preaching to the converted to some degree. And I think we can learn a lot. And you've just mentioned 2 or 3 areas there, Richard, where other domains that have focused on behavior change and the sorts of techniques and tools that they've used to drive behavior change over the last generation. And certainly that's one of the things that Richard and I are talking about to attract other speakers at future events. So keep your eye out for those. It leads on to the other question. Charlie, you talked about the absolutely critical need to sort of involve and work hand in hand with comms and marketing and HR. The challenge around language there, I suspect that you've spent quite some time actually making sure that the subtlety of the language that's used, and it comes back again to what we were saying at the outset about making this relevant and doable and something that people can have the confidence. I do understand this. This is not about technology. This is about day-to-day life. So just interested in your experience around the language side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I always look at this stuff with lots of different hats on. So because I've worked in internal comms, I understand the need for the tone of voice and the importance around that, and also that has to have a certain brand and look and feel. But the power behind something like this comes in the storytelling and the narrative that you put behind it. So language is key, yes, but the more that you can probably disassociate it with security as a whole and make it much more about people and the narratives and the stories that people are going through in their day-to-day lives, the more quickly and powerfully it will land within a business. People are interested in other people's lives. People are interested in the gossipy type stuff. They're interested in the exciting stuff that goes on, and they're interested in the day-to-day news. So if you can bring all of that into it, using language that gets attention and that sticks in people's minds, then you're onto a winner.
Yeah. Can I just give a little story of my own there? Because I was once with a board having a bit of a difficult conversation about getting investment in business continuity crisis management, which can be a dry subject, but isn't actually. And the meeting really took off when we got what we wanted, when around the board, people started talking about, yeah, when we had this flood in country X, oh yes, when we had the earthquake, when we had the terrorist threat, people began to talk about it and then they could relate to it. Of course, that's the secret. Stories make people relate to what's happening, what's being taught.
As you both know, Charlie, Richard, I'm passionate about the power of storytelling. The fact that stories, we tell stories every day to ourselves, to each other, to our kids, and it saddens me that we don't use the power of stories in such an important area of training. And training, I often find, security training areas that we tend to just tell people what we want to tell them, and it has no relation to their perspective, their understanding, and we just need to convert that into bite-sized little stories that actually people can relate to, and people can actually create their own stories, and that's really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people's attention span is less because they've got so much more going on, whether it's at work, whether it's in their personal lives, especially over the last year and a half, it's been crazy for everybody. So to get something that actually lands and has an impact and stays is the goal for me whenever I do anything.
Sure. Charlie, moving on a bit, so what sort of, are there any big gaps that you still see between, so again, it comes back to the title of the discussion, the theory that sits behind security education and the reality? So my experience is that there is plenty of evidence base out there about behavior change, but that's the struggle and the challenge in applying that within your sometimes very complex organizations. Do you still see that gap?
To some extent, but I mean, the industry as a whole has evolved so much and it's matured so much that I think those gaps are definitely closing. And then everybody that I talk to, and I have conversations with people that do the same job as me all the time, they are always talking about human behavior, things like micro learning, nano learning, ways to actually get stuff across. And the evolution has been amazing. If you compare it to when I first met you, Richard, sort of 15, 20 years ago, it's a completely different space. That I see people like me bringing in things like marketing, behavioral psychology. There's so many good books on behavioral psychology out there at the moment. And if anybody wants any recommendations, come and ask me, because I've got loads of them. But yeah, it's leadership engagement, storytelling, all of that stuff. It's just, it's a great place to be. And I find it really exciting because no day is the same. So yes, there are gaps. And I remember 10 years ago when gamification first came in, 10, 15 years ago, and everybody was raving on about the importance of gamification. Even that has massively evolved into, these bite-sized nudge-like training elements that can happen in people's day-to-day lives. And I think that is the future, and it will continue developing.
We live in a TikTok age, don't we? As you say, attention spans are minute. So if you can't say something that's particularly targeted and relevant within 10 to 15 seconds, even, you're missing an opportunity.
I wanted to pick up, in fact, on something that Nick said earlier, a kind of spoiler alert for future ones in webinars in this series. But I think somebody's already commented as well on the chat about the importance of psychology. Charlie's alluded to it at all. The fact is that security traditionally was a closed discipline. We didn't talk to people very much outside. The fact is that there are huge areas of developing ideas where we should be engaging. I've been talking recently to a number of academics in universities on the behavioural psychology front, who are not just doing the theory, but in certain cases, at least, I'm thinking of Cardiff University with Airbus, are actually developing the theory and then testing it actually in a workplace. And, people like us, people who are interested in security awareness, really should be across this, talking to the academics and the thinkers in that sense, who are now producing practical experience on the basis of their theories.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see one of the chats actually, someone said, talking about your story with the architect, Richard, that's how the RAF work out paths for airfield, let footfall decide the path. Yeah. And on that, again, talking about different domains and learning from experts and experience in different domains. I was going to say this at the end, but I'll say it now. Our next speaker on our People Matter series is Liz Murray. She's spent 20 years in the RAF, but is now heavily involved in security education training. Yes, that might be a very interesting to discuss, because I know she wants to bring some of the lessons that she's learned from the forces and the way that some of the techniques that they use to drive behaviours into the security awareness field. So Charlie, we've discussed boards and we've discussed executives. We've touched on that. What's your view in how important it is? I think I know the answer to that one, to get their sponsorship. And what do you see their role is, and how do you get that support? Because I totally understand the difficulties in getting that support. What sort of lessons have you learned in the past?
Yeah, I mean, having worked across a few different industries now, I mean, it was very, very different in the telecom space versus the financial services space. And the boards had very different backgrounds and roles and experiences of life themselves. So it's all about actually trying to adapt what you're doing to make it understandable for them and impactful for them. And it's really, really worth the investment of trying to understand your board, your executive team, and what their triggers are and what's going to interest them, so that you can get on their radar. Often or not, a lot of the boards or the execs will just have dozens and dozens of committee packs and data and statistics that they're going through all the time. And again, in order for something to stick, you have to be the thing that stands out. So you have to be the curveball that comes in around the side and actually becomes something that they sit up and take notice of. I've often found that boards, in the nicest possible way, can be quite stuck in their ways, and they've always done things in a certain way and they've developed it. And sometimes a bit of a shock in that space can help shift them and their mindsets as well. But I know Richard's the expert here with leaderships and execs, so I'll let him talk on this one.
Well, yeah, there are two things to be said, perhaps. This could be a whole webinar just on its own. But the first thing to say is that I would say that board blaming is actually quite an easy game and not very productive. Of course, there are a lot of boards that don't get it, but whose fault is that? It really should be a major, if not the principal responsibility of the security director to engage with the board individually, get to know these people as people, get to understand the way they think, get to understand their role in the business and what they're trying to do for the business, and then apply security to that. That's the way around it, rather than just saying you're idiots because you don't understand. Generally speaking, people who are on boards of major companies are not idiots. They're actually quite smart, but they just need to be spoken with like anybody else in language which they will understand. And I have to say that, you know, as I became a more experienced security director, that was the part of the job that I really liked, because I was bringing my security expertise to the table, but at the same time, learning an awful lot about the businesses where I was working and how security could support it. So yeah, there's a whole piece to be done there, which is really, really important, because if you don't have that tone from the top, if you don't have the support of the CEO and the senior execs, you are going nowhere.
Absolutely. I think you know, I again despair at times when I see presentations to the board that is all about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the sky's falling. You know, boards have moved on from that. They need to understand the risks, the information security risks they face in relation to the things that keep them up at night, which might be the next new product they're going to launch or the next new merger or acquisition. They need to understand and relate to that. The other thing I've found is that, you know, we need somehow to sort of ensure that boards are, they're all individuals, and helping them understand their own fallibility as well, their own vulnerability. They are as vulnerable as anyone else. I was speaking and briefing a chief exec of a FTSE 250 company relatively recently. It was before, I say relatively recently, it was before lockdown. That was a long time ago now, wasn't it? They had just suffered a whaling attack. And it comes back to what you've just said, Charlie, about the fact that it's after the incident, after an attack, that often behaviours do change, which is sad, but that's the truth. And it was that they had a very significant whaling attack. They lost a significant amount of money, and since then, the chief exec has become an absolute advocate and you know, a bundle of energy in making sure that everyone within his group, and it's a big, diverse organisation, have got the understanding, the skills, the awareness, and the confidence to be able to do that. And the reason that whaling succeeded is because no one put their hand up. No one thought that they should just ask a simple question. It was all done online. They were, you know, the attackers played to they do in these sorts of attacks. They played to the sensitivity, urgency, and the secrecy, and they got their money. As the colleague I spoke to, the chief exec, said, it just needed someone. Actually, what was going on.
Can I just make a quick comment, Nick, really in response to somebody who's commenting on the chat there about the role of GDPR in waking up the board. I think that's absolutely right. I'd also point perhaps towards cyber insurance, because these days, if you want any kind of decent, reliable cyber insurance, the insurer is going to come and look you over and may well give a very useful prod to the board to get you to improve your stance on cybersecurity. Yes,
and I think there's also within the regulatory compliance environment, more and more organisations, the bigger enterprise organisations, are also being far more stringent on the demands that they put on their suppliers, their advisors as well, and wanting to see evidence that they are doing things across the whole tool, but then increasingly also including, you know, how are you educating your staff? Because we know that that is the biggest vulnerability you face. And again, critically being assured that that's the case and showing that, seeing evidence that that is happening.
I wonder if I could just get in my second magic word. I referred right at the beginning to the fact there were two I hope would come up. But the second word that I always emphasize is values in any organization. And just very quickly, sometimes health and safety, as you've said, is used as an example for how cultures can be changed. Charlie and I both worked for a company where a pretty poor HSE record was turned around very, very quickly, partly because of the very strong intervention of people at the top, but also because the value that this is a safe company to work for was really, really driven hard. And if you have a value like that in your company, that we are a company, for example, that is passionate about the privacy of its customers, then that will drive through everything you do. And so the fundamental question that any employee has, which is why, what, and how, why are you asking me to do this? What do I have to do and how do I do it? That becomes much more natural in a values-based company. My fear, interested in other people's views, is that too many companies regard themselves as simply too busy to do all this sort of softy, touchy-feely stuff.
Interesting. Have you got any experience in that, Charlie? And your current role or previous roles?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen that the organisations that do this well, as Richard said, are the ones that hard bake it into their strategic objectives and their values. And having, again, talked to lots of different other security awareness professionals and communications professionals, there are organisations that have a standpoint on something, whether it be health and safety, whether it be sustainability, all of those things that actually make it part of their strategy. And by making it part of their strategy, by making it part of their values, it becomes an intrinsic part of how they do business, and it works. And it's been proven to work. The challenge often is how you influence high enough up in order to get the change at that strategic level.
Agreed. And the other thing, I hear lots of people talking about security cultures, which is fine, but for me, a company only has one culture, and for me, it's security needs to fit in with their existing culture. So security is part of the overall corporate culture, rather than, again, standing alone on, over here as a security culture. But yeah, so I'm conscious of time. If I can close up, and we'll ask answer some of the questions in a minute as well. Charlie, it's clear that you're obviously very passionate about your job, and we, at the end of the day, we should all be enjoying our job and having fun as well. So can we finish by hearing a sort of a funny story from you around some of the work that you've done in the past, and what you enjoy most about the job that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like you say, it's about fun. And if you aren't having fun doing your job, find another job where you are having fun, because it has to be a balance of working really hard, delivering what you need for your business, but also enjoying what you do. And I was very lucky in the early days of my career to work for an organisation that allowed me to just be creatively crazy on lots of different things. So I had all sorts of things going on, whether it be actors in our contact centres, whether it be mock protests at some of our stores. But one time, one of the campaigns that we did, we covered our entire campus in lots of different, what I call ambient media, so guerrilla kind of media. And one of the things that we actually did was we put on the toilet seats of all of the toilets across our main campus a sticker that said, if you aren't careful with customer information, your career could be going down here. I thought that was really funny. Quite a lot of people thought it was quite funny, but there was actually somebody within the business who must have known a journalist at the Guardian newspaper. And the next thing I knew, I was being called in to speak to my security director to explain to him how the story of the toilet sticker had made it into one of the Guardian business news columns that had gone out the day after. Now, it was a real kind of heart in the throat moment, because I thought, God, I'm going to get fired for this. But my director at the time thought it was brilliant, because it actually showed that as an organisation we were taking this really, really seriously, and that we were willing to have fun with it. So it worked out fine in the end. But it's a funny story now. It wasn't funny on the day.
It's like, what's the thing that you enjoy most? What's the thing when you get home at night? I think you're always at home at the moment. But what's the thing that you get most out of the role that you have?
It's about the people. It's about finding those passionate people within every single business who are there, even if you feel like the culture might not be necessarily very security led. You will find those people, and those people will make every single day worthwhile, because they'll invest in what you do. They'll help you with what you do, and that's why I do this job.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts, Richard?
Bravo to Charlie. Has always been a brilliant person in this particular field. So it's really interesting to hear her talking on what is now, as you say, Charlie, it doesn't look it, but a long experience.
So thanks, Charlie. So we're going to answer a couple of questions. I have one here. I work in a firm with multiple offices in different countries. Do you recommend a common approach across all cultures when it comes to security education?
Shall I go first? I would say the best approach is a common approach, but there are lots of nuances that exist in different cultures and different countries, and you have to be aware of those. And in my early career, I fell foul of that a few times, where we would launch something with a particular name and then realize that name meant something completely different in one country than another. So I would always recommend it's worth investing into groups within those countries and finding out whether it would work with them for them before you launch something on a global nature.
Absolutely. We work with a large global conglomerate who has operations out in Asia and in Europe and in the States. And rest assured that they are very different, just historical working cultures and trust with the leadership teams and things like that. And those are all got to be taken on board when you're developing the campaigns and the interventions that you're working on.
Yeah, I think just to confirm what Charlie said, I think it's absolutely essential. I mean, the basic message is what you're trying to get across stays the same. There are certain things that certain behaviors that you're trying to introduce, but the way you do that, I mean, the simple example is humor, which the Brits use a lot in security awareness. Now, that will work quite well, in my experience, in India. It falls completely flat in Italy. Because our sense of irony in particular is not part of Italian humor, or indeed of other countries. We could speculate about who they might be. And sarcasm, for example, will not work in certain cultures. So absolutely right, Charlie. You get your focus groups to sit down and say, how do we best get this across in this environment?
Another question, just a final question. I work in a heavily regulated industry, and our organization's driven by compliance. What advice do you have for moving beyond a compliance tick box approach, which I definitely get?
It's so very easy to demonize compliance and regulation in this world. And moving from telecoms, which was quite heavily regulated, into financial services, which was a whole new ballgame of regulation, it doesn't shift massively, because it is still ultimately about doing what you need to do in order to tick that box. The tick box is fine, and you can have it as part of the process, but the way you do it is the most important thing. And even if you look at regulators like the FCA, I mean, towards my last couple of years at Aviva, I was looking very heavily at psychological safety, because the FCA were shifting their focus towards culture, and they were openly trying to encourage businesses to stop looking at the list of tick boxes and start to understand how their own business actually worked, to be able to make the changes they needed to make happen. So I would say, yes, the lists are there, but you need to do the lists, but don't focus on the list, because if you do the campaign right, if you do the activity right, you'll tick all those boxes anyway.
Yeah, for me, I mean, just absolutely right again. Charlie's absolutely right there. And don't let your top management think that a compliance standard is anything less than a minimum standard, and don't let them think that it protects them from anything necessarily.
So thanks for all your comments. So we answered a couple of the questions. Steve, thanks for telling us about, so you said when communicates to our people, we found it really useful to try to explain the psychology being used to get them to respond to phishing emails, for example. Once they understand how they're being manipulated, it often lands better with them. Again, I totally agree. Understanding the tradecraft that's being used against us by these criminal gangs is really important, and just showing them and teaching them some of the tricks and techniques that they use is absolutely essential, I think, in understanding. It's understanding that sort of putting yourself in the shoes of the attacker is a technique that often works quite well. Okay, the time is okay, we've got a few minutes. So what I'd like to do is just close up. Firstly, a big thank you to Charlie. Thanks, Charlie, for all your insights today. Really interesting. I hope everyone on the call has found them of interest. So many thanks for that. Keep doing a great job, and we look forward to talking with you again sometime in the future. anyone on the call, Richard and I, we want to, we always learn lessons. It comes back to some of the things that we've been talking about. We always want to evolve and adapt the People Matter program. So please, we'd love your feedback. What worked well, what didn't work well? Are there particular subjects or areas within security awareness and education that you'd like us to discuss in the future? That would all be of real interest to us. So you've got our email addresses up there on the screen now, so please do contact us. If you have any people that you think will be great speakers in the future, great contributors to the discussions, please let us know. So say it, we already have 2 webinars booked in following this one today, which you'll be able to register at soon after the webinar. We'll be sending you out details. The first one's on the 13th of July, which I think is a Tuesday at the same time. And this is the one with Liz Murray, who I mentioned. So Liz is the Security Culture and Awareness Lead at a company called FNZ, and until very recently was the Head of Cyber Awareness Training at HBC. And Richard and I will be talking to Liz about human factors and security, building of that emotional engagement within your company. So it probably will delve into a little deeper into some of the things that we've already touched on with Charlie this morning. We're going to take summer off, and then the third People Matter webinar is on the 16th of September, again at the same time. And it's with Sian John, who's the Director of SCI Strategic Growth Business Development at Microsoft. Many of you may know Sian. She's a well-known speaker on the security circuit. She's a great lady, and she wants to talk with us about digital empathy, which she sees as a critical area in helping guide and influence people's behaviours. So I was just going to push it back out. Richard and Charlie, any final last comments?
I guess from me, it's about, sorry, Richard, it's about everybody within this industry in security awareness. The reason I've always found that I've managed to develop for myself is by helping other people helping me. We're a community. Everybody here wants to advise, guide each other. So get in touch with somebody that you know in the space, start to build your network if you haven't already, and then we'll all continue to grow.
I think my final comment would be, first of all, thank you again to Charlie for all the comments that she's made. For me, the reason that I've stuck with security so long is that it's becoming ever more interesting. In a sense, why is that? If you look back at security awareness training as it was, let's say in 2010, 2012, I mean, it was really, really boring and unimaginative. Now we're getting involved in all sorts of other areas that we've discussed, particularly behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, and these sorts of areas, which are really, really interesting in themselves. And they've given us completely different perspectives on what can be done with security awareness. I think the second point, just to emphasize, because I believe very strongly it's true, the importance of trust and values, and we're not going to get anywhere without those 2 elements in it.
Thank you, Richard. As always, you've stolen my thunder. I couldn't agree more about what you and Charlie have said. Yeah, it's, for me, it's about trying new things. It's about innovation. It's about making sure that you evolve and adapt your training, not just in line with what the latest attacks might be, but also based on understanding the context that sits behind why your employees are doing certain things, and trying to get underneath the skin of that, and understanding the influence that you have in providing the training and awareness that plays back to the context that these people are doing these things. So my final thing is to thank all of you that have come onto the webinar today. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'd love to hear more from you. We will be in contact. We'll send you the details. One thing we are, the session has been recorded. We're sending that out. We'll also be providing and developing a short summary document that brings out the key points that Charlie and Richard have made, and sending that out. And we look forward to welcoming you to the next one, which is on the 13th of July with Liz Murray. I do see actually a couple of, if we do have a little bit of time, we do have one question, two questions actually. What do you suggest is necessary to get executives to take cyber risk awareness training seriously? I think that's from John. I think we've tackled that one, hopefully. The second one is Chad, password protection. Besides changing passwords regularly and training staff, is using two-factor authentication. Very quickly, Richard, Charlie.
I'll leave that to Charlie.
We're actually having this debate at the moment at work because our Security Champions Network is having a discussion around passwords and what we should use. And I think there are lots of elements that make it up. Two-factor authentication, yes, multi-factor authentication is important, but actually it is the responsibility of the individual to have passwords that they believe are strong enough to not be hacked, both at work and at home. Because if you're not doing it at work, you're not doing it at home, and you don't want to be the one that ends up getting your password hacked.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlie. I'm conscious of time, everyone. So many thanks, Charlie, again, and Richard. And thank you all for attending. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one on the 13th of July. Many thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.